Paul Latofsky, Hartley Witney. My question concerns defence because it hasn't really been touched on at all in the discussion. It seems to me since the end of the Cold War we've seen a steady erosion of funding and capabilities for the British Armed Forces. And as a consequence, perhaps defence is facing some very difficult choices as to what Britain can do in the future and what capabilities it can retain. And I was wondering if the panel could please address this issue and give some idea of how they propose to deal with defence in the future. And if I may have the indulgence of perhaps also asking the panel if they could talk a bit about civil liberties. We've seen a lot about...
I think we'll just take the first question if we may. Gary Jones.
Okay, yes. The changing nature of the threat to Britain clearly has changed since in the last 20 or so years since the end of the Cold War. It does need a constant reappraisal of what the priorities are in defence spending. The way the threats are perceived at the moment, it seems that the best way those threats can be responded to is actually by manpower on the ground with the right equipment, with the necessary support from air and sea. So I think that defence reviews are a sort of fact of life from now on. As threats change, then the priorities for spending will change. And the problem is that the defence actually, the armed forces actually move significantly slower than the rate at which threats change. So we quite often find that we're running to catch up with changed requirements. I say it has actually got to be a matter of constant review, constant reappraisal.
Right, well, Nick Clegg and Vale plans to increase troops' pay, and what we need to do is actually reprioritise how we spend our defence more smartly. Funding or I don't know the exact word, trident I'm talking about, trying to renew that in some way, should come under review. UK generals agree with us that that is an expensive relic from the Cold War, and that is something that we should consider doing away with, because the greatest threat to the UK is the threat of a dirty bomb. So the defence spending should be reprioritised into tackling that threat and getting rid of the inefficiencies that you have in the MOD. Because what we do want to do is that lowest paid soldiers should be paid in line with new entrant police constables, which is £23,259. So that would be a pay increase of about 6,000, supporting families there. Plus, looking seriously that there are efficiencies that can be made in other areas. I mean, there are 86,000 civilian staff in the MOD, 800 staff in MOD communications and media section alone. You've got the MOD wide fleet of non-military vehicles, which cost 80 million a year for 24,000 vehicles. There's a load of things that can be done. I'm not saying that defence should overall lose its or get less funding. I'm saying that the spending should be smarter in dealing with the threats that we now face. But investing in renewal of Trident is mad, absolutely mad, especially when we're trying to stop nuclear proliferation. And it goes against Barack Obama's and Medvedev's agenda to try and reduce the stockpile of nuclear weapons. Because I believe that nuclear weapons actually attract terrorism because they want to get hold of them. And part of the reason why we are in Afghanistan is making sure that the Taliban don't seize power in Islamabad. Because if they did, that would affect.
I'm surprised Denzil Coulson says that renewing the submarines of the Trident fleet goes against Barack Obama's objective, because As the chairman of the Defence Committee, I cannot tell you how much pressure I have had from the American government to do exactly that, to renew the Trident fleet. I think there are good arguments for renewing the Trident submarines and good arguments against it. But I want to come back to the precise question. The defence budget is indeed under pressure. It is not the fault of just the Labour government. It is the fault of the Western world, which took the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War. We'd won the Cold War, and we thought wrongly that the world would become a safer place and more stable. And we didn't realise how much we had relied on the relatively cheap defence of nuclear deterrence. And the trouble with that was that nuclear deterrence worked well when we had a bipolar world. It's much less certain that it works so well in a multipolar world. And that's one of the better arguments for saying we shouldn't renew the Trident fleet. But the trouble is, NATO has become a victim of its own success. When the Cold War ended, Europe decided defence was a job done. And we stopped focusing on defence. We now spend only just over 2% of our gross domestic product on the defence of our country. And the last time we spent such a small proportion was in the early 1930s. And we know what that led to. It led to our opponents thinking we were a soft touch and they could attack us with impunity. I think no Chancellor of the Exchequer will renew the defence budget until you, the people, are saying we've got to do more. I believe we've got to do more.